Thank you. My name's Nate Richard. I'm a partner here at Scattered Acres Farms and Roaring Creek Egg Farms. I'm joined with my father here in the crowd, my boys and my wife, Missy, in the back. Scattered Acres Farms farm several thousand acres of corn, soybeans, wheat ground here in Columbia County. We also operate Roaring Creek Egg Farms. We produce eggs. We have a feed mill. We buy grain and make feed to feed all of our livestock here on the farm. So we employ about 35 people today across both of our businesses. So we're very fortunate here to that Building America's Future has decided to host this event on our farm because the interests of China purchasing farmland here in America affects us. It affects Pennsylvanians, and it's definitely an issue that's very important to us. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dave McCormick. Dave is a 7th generation Pennsylvanian. He's a West Point graduate, combat veteran, and Bronze Star recipient. He's a Pennsylvania job creator and a business leader. He's a national security expert and a strong and experienced voice for how to overcome the threat from China. And most important, he is a devoted husband and father of 6 bright young women for whom he wants to preserve the American dream. A trusted, thoughtful leader, Dave will fight for all Pennsylvanians. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks so much for hosting here. Great to be here. A beautiful day. Thank you, everybody who's on the panel. We've got a great group of panelists, and it's good to be here. You know, this is about 10 miles from where I grew up in Bloomsburg. My brother's got a farm here outside of Catawissa, and my family has a farm between Danville and Bloomsburg on Frosty Valley Road. So it's good to be home. I remember playing football and wrestling at Southern Columbia and spending lots of time in this part of the world, and it's really great to be here. You know, I decided to run for the Senate. I've got those 6 daughters, and the 6 daughters are, once you've had 6 teenage daughters, running for office seems easy. And I'm worried about America's future, and the American dream that I've had, and the America that we've all grown up in and love is not going to be here. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is how to deal with China. China is a true threat, an economic threat, a national security threat. It's becoming the leading techno-authoritarian state in the world. It's trying to displace America as the greatest superpower in the world. And Washington, both Republicans and Democrats have been slow to respond to the challenges. We've become more and more dependent on China. We've had economic policies that have helped China grow and build its economic ability and its military ability. So about 6 weeks ago, I kind of laid out a vision of the kind of leadership I'd bring to the Senate and what we should do to deal with China. And I laid out 6 bands, the bands that we should undertake to change our direction with China. The first band was something I just talked about earlier today up in Luzerne County, up in Kingston, which was stopping the flow of fentanyl into the United States, which is killing our kids, killing Americans, 106,000 Americans last year. The second ban was to stop giving China preferred trade status. It's called PNTR, which is Permanent Normal Trade Relations. We give them access to American markets. We did it over the last 20 years or so. And China hasn't followed the rules. They haven't followed the rules in intellectual property protection. They haven't followed the rules. They've subsidized their industries. So it's made it really difficult for Americans to compete on a fair playing field. You know, agricultural seeds, as an example, they've stolen intellectual property in that area. So stop that preferential treatment for China was the second recommendation. Third recommendation is we're making ourselves more and more dependent on China because while we're reducing our dependency in some areas like pharmaceuticals, we're making all this solar panels and lithium batteries in China. So when the Biden administration is going down the path of saying the whole country has to switch to EVs, we're essentially making China, giving China leverage and making them more dependent because the lithium batteries come from China and the solar panels come from China. The fourth ban that I argued for was to take China out of and essentially hold accountable the World Health Organization. So we had this huge crisis called COVID. It killed millions of Americans. It destroyed trillions of dollars of economic well-being here in America. And we still don't know how the heck it happened. We know that COVID originated in Wuhan, this city in China, but the Chinese haven't given us any insight into how that happened. And so as a result, we don't know how to not make this happen again. So I'm not sure what happened, but I know that China didn't help resolve this biggest crisis many of us have had in our lifetimes. And the World Health Organization, which is this global organization, has basically protected China rather than held it accountable. The fifth thing I said that we should do is stop letting U.S. companies and U.S. investors invest in China in a way that's helping them to build their military and to build the Communist Party in a way that's going to come against us. So we have companies today based in the Silicon Valley that are investing in artificial intelligence companies directly associated with the People's Liberation Army. We said we have to stop that. We have to ban that. And the fifth ban, which brings us here today, is the ban on the purchase of farmland, strategic purchases that are happening across America. China is buying farmland across the world. China is focusing buying farmland here in the United States. Its holdings of farmland have gone up by 10 times magnitude, a multiple of 10, in the last 10 years. They're buying land all over the Midwest. They're buying land here in Pennsylvania. And they're also buying land or attempting to buy land near military bases. So I think this is a major issue. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I think that we should restrict China, really foreign investors in general, but particularly China, from buying big chunks of American farmland. I think that should have to go through a very specific review, a strategic review to block that. I think we should have a huge emphasis on food security that comes with owning our farms here in the United States. We learned during COVID what it's like to be dependent on other countries. We couldn't get pharmaceuticals because our pharmaceuticals were in China. We couldn't get new pickup trucks because the semiconductors that we needed to go in those pickup trucks when they were assembled, we didn't have here in the United States. We do not want to be dependent on other countries owning our food supply, and we don't want to sell our precious farmland to foreign powers, particularly China. And that is the ban, the final ban that we're talking about here today. Pennsylvania, as you all know, is incredibly dependent on farming. We have 52,000 farms here in Pennsylvania. We have $174 billion of GDP, of economic activity from our farms. It's the largest employer of something like 75,000 employees here in Pennsylvania. So agriculture is so critical to Pennsylvania. And we don't want China buying up these valuable assets. And we need to have senators or leaders, but in the case I'm talking about, senators who are going to fight with a vision for how to protect Pennsylvania, how to protect America, and how to protect our farms. So that's the context for today, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. If we could, I'd like to just go around the panel here and have everybody introduce themselves. Why don't we start down here, James?
My name is James May, and I'm the Regional Director for United States Congressman Dan Muser.
Representative Joanne Stair from the 107, serving Northumberland and Schuylkill counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Ledbetter. I'm the state representative for the 109th District right here in beautiful Columbia County.
Hi, I'm Mark Schultz. I'm currently the president of the Columbia County Farm Bureau. We like to work with the farmers in our county here and attribute to the issues, and this is why I like to participate in a thing like this. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Randy Karchner, Columbia County Commissioner. Thank you.
Brian Campbell, farmer in the Berwick area, went to Central Columbia, wrestled when Dave wrestled back in the 80s, and got a good guy here.
Good, thank you, everybody. Dave, our host here, Building America's Future, brought us together to discuss China, as you mentioned, and specifically the fact that it's directly affecting us today and potentially in the future. Why is it a threat to our national security and our prosperity? And how, with good policy, can we regain our sovereignty and security over our land and our food supply here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, just to reinforce a couple things, and we got all sorts of challenges. I think it's obvious, challenges as a country right now. All sorts of challenges, everything from a wide open southern border that's having huge implications for our agriculture industry, to huge intellectual property theft that's being undertaken by the Chinese. They're stealing our technology. They reverse engineer our technology, something manufactured in China. Next thing you know, that same thing is being manufactured by a Chinese company in China. And China's economy is state-run. It's a state-run economy. So when China tries to compete with the United States, you're not competing on a level playing field because China is investing in those companies in a way that doesn't have to be necessarily profitable. And so when U.S. firms compete with China, because it's not a level playing field, and because China hasn't played by the rules, they don't get our American producers, our American manufacturers, our American farmers don't get a fair shake. So that's the world that we're living in right now with China. And so the first step is to hold China accountable. Hold China accountable for its misbehavior. Hold China accountable for the fentanyl crisis. Hold China accountable for COVID, all those other things. And it's to reestablish a relationship with China that is on an even playing field. China is the second biggest economy in the world. It's the second biggest country in the world. It has the second biggest military in the world. We're going to have to coexist with China. We don't want to go to a war with China. But we also want to have a relationship with China that's based on fairness and recognize that China poses a real threat. And so when we have that context, that's how we come to what the policy should be. The policy should be, in my opinion, a fair playing field for commerce. If we're going to trade with China in things that aren't critical to national security, we trade on a fair basis, so we have to have open markets both ways. It has to be fair. If it's not fair, then we have to impose the restrictions to make sure it is fair. We have to demand fairness. And we don't want to give China the leverage of owning our land. We don't want to give them the leverage of owning our land, because all of a sudden if things start to go south and the relationship goes in a bad direction and we start to have conflict, China would have control of a critical asset right here in the United States. The other thing that's a problem is the more China integrates itself into our agriculture industry, the more intellectual property theft can be a real problem. So we have great advancements in our agriculture industry. We have great advancements in seeds, great advancements in innovation, great advancements in how we're farming that's creating greater productivity in farming. We need to protect that strategic advantage we have. And in fact, we need to invest more in the basic research and development that's going to make our agriculture industry even more productive into the future. So as your senator, I would be advocating an agenda that basically makes sure that we have free and fair relationships around the world, particularly with China, that we have policies to make sure agriculture producers, but also manufacturers, compete on a level playing field. And I wouldn't give China leverage on us by allowing them to buy farmland that they would use to an advantage and disadvantage us and give them control of our food supply. The other thing I would say is some of China's land purchases are mysteriously near military bases. I also would restrict those. So I do not want the Chinese making strategic purchases in the United States. I would have a process that would block that, and I think that makes America safer and more prosperous.
Thank you, Dave. And I'd like to open up, too, to the audience. If there's any questions or anybody here in the panel has any questions for Dave, feel free to raise your hand or go ahead and ask. Randy?
Well, Dave and I talked about this a little bit. A few states have already restricted some bans on purchasing from China. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah,
see how hard it is?
Yeah, there's been 14 states that have put various restrictions in place on the purchase of farmland. But this is a national issue. What is the national government responsible for? What's the United States Senate responsible? It's responsible for issues that are critical to the entire country. And so what I'm saying is we should have a regulatory framework. We should have a set of restrictions nationally. So the Chinese can't play games between Kansas and Iowa or Pennsylvania and Ohio. We need to have a path, a model for restricting these farmland purchases across our country. So it does happen at the state level. I think those state legislators have been smart. They've said, okay, this is a real problem, but we need something at the national level. Frankly, we need a senator who's going to lead and understand the national security implications of being soft on things like this. And fortunate enough to be in the Senate, that's the kind of agenda that I'd bring to the table.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Jim?
So what's going to happen with property that China owns now? I believe it was Arkansas where they owned basically Syngenta. They took that over. What's going to happen? They were trying to basically take the ground back.
Yeah, I don't know. The short answer is I don't know. Right now, as I looked at the briefing coming in here, I think it's something like 370,000 acres right now the Chinese have bought. So relative to foreign ownership of farmland in the United States, it's relatively small. What's concerning is it's growing like this. And this is one of the things about the United States is we have rule of law, obviously, so you can't just grab someone's grab someone's property rights. That's what protects us all, usually. Sometimes the government gets a little enthusiastic. So I'm not sure how that would be litigated, but ultimately we don't want them to buy more farmland. And I think we want to look very carefully at the national security implications of the property or the land that's been bought. The farmland's a problem, but right now it's at a relatively small level. The property that's owned next to national security facilities, I have much more concern about. And the reason, obviously, is that with technology evolving the way it is, that proximity gives you a window into what's happening on those bases. And interestingly enough, if you go to other countries like Australia and some in Europe, the Chinese have bought land or tried to buy land near those military facilities. So this is part of a strategy to gain leverage and intelligence. We have to stop it.
Nate,
Go ahead.
I'll just jump back into that, Jim. One of the things that I'm encouraged by looking at this panel, and you all should be too, Dave alluded to it, there certainly needs to be that federal framework, and that would allow those consistencies state by state. However, we have county officials, we have state officials. I was proud to co-sponsor House Bill 35 or House Resolution 35 that begins on that path that Dave was alluding to on banning the communist China coming in and buying agriculture ground within Pennsylvania and around military bases and places that they shouldn't be. And so that's one of the things that I think we should take away from this, Jim, is that we can remain vigilant. Agriculture is the #1 industry in Columbia County. And I know everyone in this room knows that. I know everyone on this panel knows that. But what that means to me is the same thing that Dave is focused on, Representative Stair and I can be focused on, Congressman Muser can be focused on, Commissioner Karshner can be focused on, in layering our defenses against this at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level. Some of you in here are township supervisors. We live in a commonwealth, and one of the things that I take great pride in is the strength and authority that our local government has. And so it's important that we get out ahead of this because, to your point, Dave, it's not slowing down. It's not slowing down. And so if we know it's happening, Jim, we need to make sure that we have those discussions with our township and our zoning officers, with our commissioners, with our state representatives. I know this panel is aware of the problem, and we're doing what we can to continue pushing against it and putting those guardrails in place to avoid it from happening. But having you guys be vocal within the community and understanding the issue also gives us the support to ensure that we continue down that path.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the point you made that's sort of embedded in there is how many of us, probably everybody in this audience, has lost faith that the government can get much done. Like we've all sort of it's one of the main things I thought about when I decided to run for the Senate. Like, can I actually, winning's one thing. If I win, can I do anything, right? And I'm convinced that I can do something, but the way it happens is sort of the way it's happening in this room. So if you have a U.S. Senator that's going to come into communities like this, roll up their sleeves, work with officials at the county level, at the state level, it's like a team effort, bring people together. By the way, it's not a Republican and Democratic thing. It's a getting stuff done thing for the people of Pennsylvania. That's the way problems get solved. That's the way we're going to solve the fentanyl crisis, which I talked about a couple hours ago. That's the way we're going to deal with strategic purchases of farmland. That's the way we're going to fix the country. And it's going to start in rooms like this with an integrated team of people that say, hey, we got to fix the problem. And so I'm glad you made that point because this isn't some wave your hand, the new senator is going to solve everything. It is actually working with everybody at all levels of government. So it's a team sport. And this is one where we can do a lot quickly because the problem's clear.
Thank you. Any other questions out there?
It'd be focused on. Thanks. The question, if you didn't hear it, was is the ban I'm calling for focused exclusively on China or other foreign countries? It's China to start with. China to start with. I think we have an existential crisis. Everybody uses that word too much, but what that means is we are at an inflection point where we have to have an integrated strategy for dealing with China. It's almost like a frog in boiling water kind of thing, where the risk from China is growing, but you see just modest incremental changes. There hasn't been a like, okay, we're at risk, break the glass. We got a real problem. And so the agenda I laid out is a China-specific agenda with the 6 bands that I talked about. And some of those bands are applicable elsewhere. But what I'm advocating is that we take this existential threat on. It's the biggest issue we're facing. As big a challenge as what's going on in the Middle East is, as big a challenge is Putin's aggression into Ukraine. All of those things are problems. The rise of China and the threat China poses is the challenge that's going to haunt us for the next 20 or 30 years. And so that would be the focus, although some of these things may apply. There are other countries. I certainly wouldn't want Moscow in here or Iran buying our farmland either. Right now, the country that's showing the propensity, the will, and the growth of purchases is China.
Go ahead, Jim.
So I'm glad that you're focusing on this. My question is, for the amount of money that flows back and forth between the United States and China, without replacing all the representatives and senators that are now in place in Washington, how do you think you're ever going to get them on board to get these policies in place?
Yeah.
There's a lot of money made in the stock market, and we all know who's making out the best of the stock market.
Not most Pennsylvanians.
I see it being an issue that you're going to have a lot of pushback.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, it's there's no doubt about that. The relationship with China over 20 years, there was a kind of a big bet. There's a big bet that Republicans and Democrats made. This wasn't one side of the, both parties made this bet. And the bet was if we brought China into the global trading system and we lowered tariffs and made it easy for China to grow and trade with the United States, that'd be great for China. It'd be great for America because we'd eventually get access to Chinese markets and American agriculture producers and everybody else could sell into China. And that would make China a more benign country. The bet failed. It was a bad bet. It was a bad bet because essentially what happened is we got cheaper stuff from China that when you go to Walmart and buy stuff, it's cheaper than it would have been otherwise, some things at least, less so now than ever. But China never opened up its markets. It never made it easy for U.S. companies to trade, and it stole all of our stuff, stole our intellectual property, and did all sorts of other things. Like I said, there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be a reset on what that relationship looks like. And it's going to be very difficult, as you're saying, to do that in one big splash. But the way that I think about it is like a target, like a bullseye. Think of a bullseye with rings around the bullseye, like a dartboard. And at the red-hot center of the dartboard are industries where you could never think you want those in the hands of China. Never. Semiconductors, pharmaceuticals. Do you want your pharmaceuticals? I was shocked to learn that our pharmaceutical supply chains depended on China, right? Do you want your farmland in the hands of China? That's the red-hot center. Like, of course, it's obvious. I'd like to find the person on the floor of the Senate that wants to debate me on the argument that we should let the Chinese buy our farmland. I'd like to meet that person because I think I'll win that argument. Same with semiconductors, same with pharmaceuticals. Then there's the second concentric circle. Those are things that are still super critical, but there's at least an argument that other countries could produce them. And it goes on and on and on, those different, and there's lots of things that we can continue to have economic relationship with China on, and doesn't put our economy or our national security at any risk. And so that's the kind of framework I think you need, and you start with the things that are just indefensible. And I think we can make real progress on that. And honestly, part of why I'm doing this and coming out and speaking with folks like you is I want to make sure I understand those things clearly through the eyes of the people that are most affected by the relationship with China. As I said, I was in Luzerne County this morning, and I'm talking to a young woman that used to be an addict and is no longer an addict and went through the rehab, and the prosecutors that are prosecuting the fentanyl dealers and the police officers that are dealing with the gangs, the cartels from Mexico. I want to see the person that was going to make the argument that we shouldn't ban fentanyl from China. So anyway, this is trying to strengthen my argument so when I go into the ring and fight, I win the battles that we got to win. But it's going to be hard, no doubt.
I've heard Congressman Muser ask that same question about how do you ever get things done, and it's a valid question. I mean, when you see what's taking place, and he gives sort of the standard answer, and then he says, we also need to get people like my good friend, Dave McCormick, in the Senate, because essentially what happens now is, if something along these lines is being passed in the House, many times it gets killed in the Senate or it doesn't get passed in the White House. And right now, Congressman Muser, as an example, has legislation where he's trying to stop this pause that's on the LNG, the liquefied natural gas, taking place right now. And he has legislation that's trying to stop the pause that's taking place. And you say, how does that impact what's happening here with China? Well, you mentioned before, I think it was number 4 or number 3, reduced dependency. Right now, once we do that, we become more dependent on the solar panels, and it's maybe intentional, but it increases our dependency on China. But the answer that I've heard Congressman Muser give is that yes, we do need to see what we can do to make sure that we can get more things done. But the way we get more things done is to have more people working alongside us in both the House and the Senate to make sure we can get those things done.
Yeah, that's a good point, and Muser's a good example. The other thing I would say is, some of you in this room know me, some of you don't know me, but I think it's important that the people that are going into public life, it's not a career. You're not. This isn't when the founders signed the Constitution, they didn't have this idea that people are going to graduate from college and spend 40 years in politics, and that's how they're going to make their life and their living. So I'm a Bloomsburg kid. I've been way more successful than I ever thought or dreamed of. Certainly than my dad ever thought it would be. And so I don't need the job. The job's not even going to be that much fun, to be honest with you. But it would be an honor to have the job because it's an opportunity to serve people. The reason I make that point is I don't need to make a living after this. I don't owe anybody anything. I don't owe President Trump anything. I don't owe Mitch McConnell anything. The only people I would owe anything to are the people of Pennsylvania who put me in office. I want to just say that for a minute because that mindset is really critical. I don't need to earn a living after this. This is a commitment to service. And when you have that kind of liberty, that's when you can break some glass. And breaking some glass is what we need right now. We don't need incremental change. We need glass breaking.
So, Dave, to follow up on that, where is Senator Casey coming up short right now? I saw the House passed the bill to reform the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. This organization controls all purchases of land by our adversaries. The Senate has a similar bill, but Casey isn't on it.
Yeah. Well, our sponsor, I want to say explicitly, our sponsor is not sponsoring a political event. So this is a topic, but I can speak to that. That is just I'm obviously running. I think it's been AWOL. I think there's been very little leadership from Senator Casey on agriculture issues. Go to the farm show, like I did a couple of times a few weeks ago, and stop in the dairy farm or the cattleman or any place and say. And I ask the question, what are the most important issues? They lay out the issues. It's whole milk in schools, or it's tax policy for succession of family farms, or it's how inflation's kicking the butts of lots of farmers, or it's labor and the challenges of getting legal migrant labor. Those are the issues I hear about. And then I ask the question, what's Senator Casey done on this? And the answer is, well, we've never seen Senator Casey. And yet this is the biggest industry in the Commonwealth. So I am very committed to being deeply engaged on these issues. I don't pretend, Matt knows, we have a farm, but I don't pretend to be a farmer. That's an honorable distinction that you have to earn. But I am sympathetic and very engaged on these issues. And so I think it's very important that our Senator from the Commonwealth focus on these issues. And as it relates to China and the strategic ban on farmland purchases or a strategic review, a national security review, nowhere. He's been AWOL on it. And I think it's probably because he's been AWOL on a lot of issues, and he's been particularly AWOL on issues that affect our farmers. And so I would be the opposite of that.
Thank you. Any thoughts on that?
I'd like to, if I could, just to Jim, and I was at a forum last year. I was running for county commissioner, and it came up, and this subject means more to me today because of that forum, but there's a lot of conflict around the world right now, and and I don't know where that's going to go. But the United States has some pretty big muscles, and when I say muscles, I'm talking about the military and our artilleries and whatnot. But it doesn't matter how big your muscles are. The person that controls the food controls the country, and that's where we're headed. If we let China or other countries control our food, it doesn't matter how big our muscles are when it comes to war.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Dave up here? Go ahead.
Just one comment. Many years ago, when we were down in Washington with the Farm Bureau, the comment was made by Lou Barlotta that our food is our biggest national security issue. And that has to be emphasized with every American. Because people don't realize where their food comes from.
Yeah, for sure. It's also a source of power to be not only be able to feed your own population, to be a source of food for the world. Just like it's a source of power to be the biggest LNG producer in the world and be able to export. So I look at it on multiple levels. To be able to feed your own population, of course, we've got to have that. We couldn't put that in the hands of somebody else. But then to be the most productive country in the world in terms of exporting, look at what happened to Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine is the biggest producer of wheat to Europe, and all of a sudden the Europeans are not able to get the wheat they need. Price of wheat shoots up, and this is what happens. So it's a source of power that we are the most productive agriculture country in the world, that we can feed our own population, export. It's the same with natural gas. And I'll just bring that together here because natural gas is such an important part of our economy in Pennsylvania. It's in many ways why a lot of family farms still exist, because people found natural gas in those family farms, and that's allowed people to continue the family farms. Keeping these family farms in place is really critical. That is not going to just happen. We've already lost. I looked at the numbers 15 years ago, something like that. We had 60,000 family farms. We have 53,000 family farms. It's declined by 15% or something like that. A big reason for that is it's just been hard to make these work economically. It's without scale, right? Second is our tax policies make it really hard to transition from generation to generation, right? I don't know what farmland is around here now. It's 5, 6, 7,000 acres, something like that. I was down in Lancaster County. It's 50,000 an acre. 50,000 an acre. You got a 100-acre farm? I mean, who can afford to pay the taxes on that if their folks die and you're going to pay the estate tax? So these things don't just happen unless you have leadership that says, wait a second. Agriculture is a strategic priority. Food security is a strategic priority. We need a set of policies that are going to allow our family farms to continue to prosper. And then I'll make the final point, which you all know, which is it's an important community too. Nobody is in this farming for the most part. Maybe you are because you're at such scale. Nobody's in this because it's the most lucrative thing they can possibly do. They're in it because it's a lifestyle. It's a way of living with their family. It's a way of producing that is unique and special. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose that. Letting China buy up our farmland is one problem. Bad policy that doesn't allow the transition from family generation to generation is another problem. Stupid policies that drive up inflation, that make it hard to pay for fuel and everything else are another problem. We got to have smart leadership that fights for our farmers because they recognize how important it is.
Thank you very much. Charlie, go ahead.
Dave, you kind of led into something that's been the majority of people in here are Farm Bureau members. By far, the majority here are Farm Bureau members. I'm the state director. This is the state director. Matt Ballard is the state director. Talk about policy. Farm Bureau is a grassroots organization that creates policies. We have those policies in place. Talk about food security. That's one of the main points, food security. We would love to sit down and hear your ideas, as we are today, and talk about Farm Bureau policy. We've done the same thing with Senator Casey. This is a nonpartisan.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we'd like to have that opportunity.
I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. And, as I said, I've talked to a couple folks, and I might have mentioned to you, but I talked to Keith Eckel the other day, and he was making the same recommendation. And Carl, obviously, Carl Schaefer's been very supportive and involved. So I'd love to do that in the best way to do it. Whatever you think, just a way to get smart on all the issues from your perspective, because as I say, I think it's critical.
I will talk to our President Huffman.
Yeah,
I talked to him already today, but he's in a trustee meeting now.
good.
We'll talk about that and make that happen.
Great. I met him at the farm show when Mike Firestone did an event, and I met him briefly. So we talked briefly, and I'd love to get together.
Okay, one thing that you mentioned briefly, talking about ag labor. Brian, I'm also the chair of the ag labor committee. H2A labor.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about that.
Great.
Year-round visas for agricultural workers, because for many of our members, ag labor is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Getting reliable labor, particularly crops rotting in the field.
Yeah.
And Brian could speak to that much better than I can.
Yeah. No, I've heard this, Brian, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. But I mean, we can do two things at the same time, and they need not be at odds. They're not at odds. Our southern border is a disaster, an absolute disaster that jeopardizes our national security, our economy, fentanyl, 160 people on the terrorist watch list. I mean, it's a debacle of epic proportion. We must fix that, and at the same time, we must reform our legal immigration process to meet the needs of an ever-changing dynamic economy. And that includes legal migrant labor, and that includes, some of the particular skills that, I go to most employers in Pennsylvania, I say, what's the biggest problem? They say, I can't get skilled labor. So there is a way, and that need not come at the expense. In fact, it can be to the benefit of the American worker. So there is a way to do both of these things, and I'd love to get the specific ideas and just hear what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I can speak a little on H2A. Obviously, it's a guest worker program, federal program. Some of the regulations that are involved in it, a lot of people would like to see them get changed. I've come to the fact that it's hard to get them changed and maybe impossible to get them changed. So we're just trying to work with them the best we can. But education, and the more you can understand what the deal is, some stuff just doesn't make sense, but yet it doesn't change. So I'm actually on the Workforce Development Board currently for the state on the Ag Committee chairman. So we're trying to do some things, and really education is the biggest key. Folks just don't understand. But there's no question, labor, especially in the vegetable industry, we can't do it without labor coming out of Mexico. So immigration, right there at the top of the list. Fentanyl problems that you talk about, learning from these H2A guys that are coming across, how the cartels are working, just that education learning. But H2A is a huge, huge deal.
Yeah, great. I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Go ahead, Rich.
Rick Schuman, I'm ninth-generation farmer. My son came back to the farm. He was content. We talked about saving the ground and passing it on from generation to generation. My concern is you look around the room, the average age of the farmers getting older and older. And so there's not so many young people. There's a young fellow sitting here behind me now, which I'm glad to see here today. But we need to work on developing programs to bring more young folks into our occupation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm sure that part of that has to be making the economics of passing a generation to generation plausible, and I think part of it is also showing with the right support how a farming life, it can be financially viable. And as you know, the one other thing I forgot to mention was regulations. So you go talk to farmers and you say, "What if you could wave a magic wand, what could you fix?" And I mean, I was with a cattleman the other day who's raised a bunch of steers, and he took me through the regulations that he had to have for migrant labor. By the way, the regulations on the facilities where they would stay, the regulations near. I mean, it was when I got to the end of this conversation of all the things he needed to do just to be able to run his, 150 head of steer. It was mind-boggling. So we need to have regulations that protect our food safety. We need to have regulations that protect, all the things we need to protect. But our regulatory state is spiraling out of control because these regulatory agencies, let's give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Let's say these are well-meaning people. You say, listen, you're a hammer looking for a nail. What's the right regulation? And they just compound on one another. And there's no mechanism by which regulations get reviewed and taken away. And Trump had some ideas on that around, for every new regulation, you get rid of 2. It's smart. There may be ways to have a fast-track, accelerated regulatory review where you challenge a regulation and it has to be resolved in 90 days and it doesn't cost you a bunch of legal money. There's ways to do that. Now, ask yourself what a senator should do. Well, the senator, the legislative branch is an equal to the executive branch. It is in part responsible for keeping the executive branch accountable. So who do those regulatory agencies work for at the federal level? They work for the president. My job as a senator would be to say, wait a second, Department of Agriculture or Interior, wherever it is, wait a second. Why is that the process for permitting reform for natural gas? That seems extraordinarily labyrinth and burdensome to do something very basic. Same with agriculture regulations and so forth. So sorry to go off on that rant, but I think that I can potentially play a big role on that as well as a big advocate. And you will know better than I of what it takes to get young people excited. But I think part of it's making it the vibrant future opportunity that it can be and will be, the lifestyle that I think so many people have taken so much satisfaction from. Yes, sir.
So just to follow up on you talking about regulations. So regulations force a lot of our industry out of country. Right now, we depend on quite a bit of imports for the agriculture sector. How things are going to play out with the shipping lanes being disrupted, or fertilizer, whatever comes across. Input costs right now are said to entice our young people to get into the agricultural business. I just did some figuring here for an insurance agent. We want to do some numbers and been talking to some legislators out in Washington State, but we want to know input cost, how much we're getting into raising corn, beans, or whatever. So I kind of figured out, but anyway, to figure everything in, I'm just going to say for the way grain prices are right now, which we're not exporting much to China, they're not buying, but we're buying their technology to put in the ground to raise this stuff, but they don't want it back. So now our input cost to what we're making, and I'm just going to use a figure, $75 an acre is what you're making profit compared to your input cost. What's your thoughts on backing off on some of the regulations so we can have companies in this country producing this stuff that we don't have to pay extra shipping and costs and everything else involved, that we can farm and make it profit to entice our young people to farm?
Yeah, that was the point I was trying to make, which is the regulatory burden. It's not just farming, it's manufacturing, it's everything. The regulatory burden increasingly makes American manufacturers, American farmers, uncompetitive. So I'm not saying do away with all regulations. I'm saying that what's happened is that in pursuit of reasonable goals, environmental food safety, environmental cleanliness, all these things, in pursuit of good, logical public service goals, we've lost the thread, we've lost the narrative, we've lost the story in terms of what we're trying to do here. And I think the agriculture industry is one place that seems evident, but it appears evident to me across. And again, look at these regulatory agencies. Look at how much they've grown in the last 10 years, the last 20 years. I went to 1960, the Federal Register of the regulations for the federal government, or something like this. It's like this now. It's compounded. It's grown over time. So the only way to deal with that is systematically. You have to basically say, what's the mechanism by which regulations get reviewed, the cost-benefit analysis is considered, and what's the mechanism by which regulations are grandfathered? Wait a second, that thing that made sense in 1965 doesn't make sense anymore. That's the process that I think we have to go through, and it'll make all businesses more competitive, particularly including the ag industry.
It's a shame. It costs so much more money, and they can attribute to this just dealing with permits and everything else.
Well, this is.
It takes them an extra 2 years to get a project done because
I know that's true, and I keep coming back to it, but it's so important. It's so important for this area. If you said you were king for a day of Pennsylvania, what would you do if you were king for a day? You could do one thing. What would you do? Well, Pennsylvania has the 5th largest natural gas reserves in the world. If Pennsylvania were a country, it'd be bigger than many of those Middle Eastern countries in terms of its natural gas reserves. On top of that, Pennsylvania is located within 400 or 500 miles of 60% of the population, right? So it's like the blessing of all blessings. And yet our ability to drill and export natural gas is very constrained. It's constrained because we can't drill. It's constrained because we don't have pipelines that can carry it to Boston and New York and other places. It's constrained because we can't put a port even though we have Atlantic access, we can't put a port in to export. All of that is because of regulations. State regulations, federal regulations. Just think about it. The unbelievable benefit to Pennsylvania it would unlock the natural gas industry. Remember here, I mean, I knew something was going on in Bloomsburg when I came back. Everybody had new pickup trucks. Like this fracking was a big deal, right? This is the beginning of something that could be an energy revolution that would change America's trajectory, make us a net exporter in a very significant way. But we have to change the regulations to do it. And the Democratic Party and Senator Casey in particular have advocated restrictions on natural gas drilling, more regulation, and that's come at real economic cost to the people of Pennsylvania and the people of America. It's a perfect example of what you're saying, and it's incredibly burdensome.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to thank Building America's Future for getting us all here today. I'd like to thank the audience, our panelists, and everybody who's been involved, and especially thank Dave for coming out and talking about this issue that's so critical to our future, China. So I'd like to ask Dave for just some closing remarks
Yeah, thank you.
what brought us here.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for making time. It's really so good to be here. And it's good to be here and talk about something that's so important to our country, so important to Pennsylvania. And you know, I'm excited. I'm honored to be running, and I think this and many issues stand in the way of America being all that we want it to be. You know, second time I've run. The first time I ran, I lost. The second time, you know, you listen less to the political consultants. So I said, I want a bus. I'm going to get a bus and drive across all these backcountry roads, and so the bus is sitting out there. My wife was totally opposed to the bus, and I said, honey, if it doesn't work out, we'll take that bus, and we'll go across the country, be a second honeymoon. So she wasn't that excited about it, but the bus is out there, and you can sign the bus. So if you would, on the way out, sign the bus. It's going to be running across our great Commonwealth for the next 9 months, and it's all part of a plan to really not only get Pennsylvania moving in the right direction, but take back the country. Thank you all for being here. Having a great strategy to deal with China is at the key to all of this. And thank you for Building America's Future for hosting a great event. Thank you all for being here.